Hello everyone, this is Genma here to welcome you to this Crossbell Duology Retrospective. This is part of a series of videos of me rambling about the Trails series and talking about why the games are amazing. I'm even tackling smaller stuff like the manga, so if you're interested in Trails, please subscribe down below. These videos are incredibly hard to make, so if you're interested, please feel free to support me on KoFi in the description. I would really appreciate it. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to NIS for the review copy of Trails to Azure. It really helped a lot. But I need to give the disclaimer that everything in this review are my own thoughts, and I will list the negatives just like I would the positives. But without further ado, let's dive right in. The language barrier can be a bit of a cruel mistress. Sometimes you have companies that manage to release most of their games in the West, but sometimes you don't. An unfortunate reality is that often these games will never make it outside of Japan. But other times, fans may go out of their way to make those games available to Western players regardless. Trials of Mana, previously known as Seiken Densetsu 3, was one of those games. Up until 2019, it seemed like this game from 1995 was never going to be released in the West. Yet, because of dedicated fans, I was able to experience it during some of the more formative years of my life, long before its official release. Yet there are even more examples. Mother 3, Tales of Destiny 2, Shining Force 3, and half of the Fire Emblem franchise are all notable ones that come to mind. Due to varying circumstances, we started getting the Trails series pretty late, with Sky First Chapter's localization coming in 2011, and a 4-year translation period for its follow-up. As of 2011, there were 5 games in the series out in Japan, and we've been doing catch-up ever since then. But I'll go into that in more detail in a later video. Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, originally released in 2010 and 2011 respectively, are very important games to the overall series canon. Yet despite this, Xseed and after that NIS were tasked with releasing the Cold Steel games instead, as they were newer releases. A decision I don't entirely agree with for reasons I will go into when we get to Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4, but it is a decision I understand at least. Now, while there were fan translations floating around for the Crossbell games, they were pretty low effort with some translation choices that were, let's just say, questionable. What the heck you said? Snivy, I am begging for an answer.
The definition of the word. Over
guys,
here.
Get ready! Get ready, guys! Crossbell really is a city! That's where the Geofront team came in. Geofront, a team of fans who wanted to make a professional translation, worked together to not just translate the games, but make them a passable port by modern standards. They include lots of quality of life features, turbo, text logs, minor graphical updates, and a number of other features. But then something surprising happened. After they finished Azure's translation, NIS announced that they would be localizing the games, basing it off Geofront's translation, something that is borderline unprecedented. So why did I go into this much detail about fan translations? Well, aside from padding out the intro, this shows the level of passion from fans of this arc. Before the Geofront translation was even finished, there was insane amounts of praise for these games, and I think that passion fueled the Geofront team to want to make these as accessible as possible to a larger fan base. Also, their increasing importance in the later games was probably a big factor too. These are incredibly beloved games in the Trails fanbase, featuring a cult following similar to that of Fire Emblem 4 and Mother 3. Having played these games, what do I think? Now, I'm sure some of you are considering playing these games as your first Trails, and as blasphemous as it is, I will actually consider that angle as I tackle these games. Now, I don't think you should personally, but I do think these games function decently enough standalone, with the exception of one subplot. A subplot that not only spoils the Sky games, but will also mean very little to new players. Now, I will be avoiding talking about that for a bit, but I will have timestamps in this video for when I do talk about that subplot, so keep an eye out for that. Now that said, I definitely think you should play the Sky games first via Steam. They are relatively cheap, run well on most PCs, go for sale pretty regularly, and in my opinion they have some of the best stories in the entire series. And if you play those first, you won't be missing out much with this story, so please go ahead and do so. But if you need a bit more convincing, again, go and watch my previous video up through the end of the Sky First Chapter section. That should give you a good idea of what you're getting into, and I hope you enjoy the games. Now before I continue, I need to give a disclaimer. Everything I'm about to say will be about the PC and Switch versions of Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. The PC and Switch versions are enhanced releases with better visuals, quality of life changes, and many features that were previously only in the Geofront version. Features that are not on PS4. The PC and Switch releases feature a text log, tons of UI customization, improved graphics, and more. Personally, I think PC is the best way to play the whole series since all of the games are on it, but Switch seems like a pretty valid way to go due to handheld play. Unless you have one of those Steam Decks, that definitely works. The PS4 version is just a straight translation of the Japanese Kai release. This is information we found out only about a month prior to release, and while I'll spare you the understandable reaction to this, the PS4 version is fine and includes several enhancements from the original release, most notably Turbo and a different feature I will talk about later. Special thanks to Infielder Seth for the PS4 footage. That said, I'm so stoked to talk about these games, so let's get over the barrier and talk about two of my favorite games in the entire Trails series.
The autonomous state of Crossbell. On the surface, the hustle and bustle of every day passes from dawn to dusk. Yet under that facade, there is something far more sinister living in the underworld. Criminals and common thugs are protected by the very system meant to protect us. As time and again we have buckled under the pressure of our neighbors, the Erebonian Empire and the Calvard Republic. This situation, dubbed the Crossbell problem, has led to skirmishes between our neighbors ever since our very founding. Each nation waging their claim to Crossbell as part of their territory. It's only thanks to a piece of paper known as the Non-Aggression Pact that the people can breathe one big sigh of relief. Yet those less ignorant know each nation's influence has seeped far too deep for us to truly relax. Our law enforcement time and time again find themselves helpless before our neighbors. In search of justice, the people now look to the bracers, but even they can only do so much thanks to their code. The city where anyone can dream has become the city of sin. The police find themselves at a crossroads as a green young man named Lloyd Bannings arrives on the scene. While Bannings has returned home from abroad to begin work for the Crossbell Police Department, things have begun to move, and Crossbell may never be the same. With how things are developing, I can't help but think, how long will Crossbell last?
Last time we looked at the Kingdom of Liberl, a small, more contemporary region within the Trails universe. However, Trails from Zero marks the series' first departure into a new land, and it is quite the shift. The autonomous state of Crossbell is probably my favorite setting of the entire Trails universe. There are many reasons for that, but let's get into what makes Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure so different from the Sky series. First, compared to Liberl, Crossbell is significantly more modern in its aesthetic. Here, orbital technology has not only advanced, but is booming, with cell phones and the internet now being brand new inventions in this universe. The first time I played these games coming off Sky, I was in a little bit of shock considering how much technology had developed in Crossbell compared to the previous games, but it's something you do really get used to, and it's a setting I really enjoy. Additionally, Crossbell is the smallest region in the series up to this point, being about a third the size of Liberl. But because of this, a lot more detail is put into the individual parts of Crossbell, with memorable vistas across every corner. Also, to remind you of some exposition I gave last time, Crossbell is northeast of Liberl and is wedged in between the Erebonian Empire and the Republic of Calvard. These nations have long fought over this territory, but it's also led to Crossbell being sort of a melting pot of both cultures, with the East District having a notable Eastern aesthetic, while the West is more like the architecture we're used to. But to go into detail on how the setting affects the narrative, we'll have to talk about the first game in the Crossbell arc. So let's talk about Trails from Zero. Trails from Zero is one of my favorite games in the whole series. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it is better than Sky's second chapter, but this game is just incredibly solid. I originally played Zero via the Geofront translation shortly after finishing Sky the Third back in 2020, and I loved it. Almost everything about it. Now after this replay, I can confidently say that my feelings on it have not changed too much. But to talk about my first experience with Zero, I feel like I kinda need to come clean about Sky the Third. I went into that game in early 2020 itching to start a new adventure in a new land, so its pocket dimension setting kind of alienated me. Because of that, I personally feel like I was unfair to Third back in the day due to my personal expectations, and while I certainly still have my problems with the game, it's definitely a lot better than I gave it credit for. See, at the time what I wanted to see was more of Zemuria and get more of what I liked about second chapter, and in hindsight, Trails from Zero was the game I was looking for. Now, tonally, this game slides somewhere in between Sky first chapter and second chapter as far as stakes are concerned. This game still spends a good amount of its runtime developing the setting, world, and characters. However, the plot is a bigger driving force this time around compared to first chapter, which makes things a lot more exciting. So let's go ahead and talk about the basic premise. Zero takes place shortly after Trails in the Sky III and follows a brand new main character named Lloyd Bannings. Lloyd is an up-and-coming detective who finds himself placed into a weird new division of the Crossbell Police Department known as the Special Support Section, or SSS for short. During the intro, he is introduced to his co-workers and party members, Ellie McDowell, Randy Orlando, and Tio Plato. The four are sent on a training mission in the city's sewer system known as the Geofront, and afterwards are told the purpose of their division. What is the purpose of the SSS? Well, the simple answer is to get over barriers. As explained in the previous section, corruption has run rampant within the government, and because of that, the SSS was formed under Chief Sergei. The function of this department being to win back some of the goodwill from the Bracers. How? Well, by doing what the Bracers do. Your job is to not only look into crime, but to also do small jobs for people much like the Bracers. If you don't know what a Bracer is, please play the Sky games or watch my previous video. Now, one thing that sets this apart from Sky is there are a lot more moments where the game will ask you to pay attention and make decisions. This is where Lloyd actually gets to do some police work. Since Lloyd is a detective, a big part of this plot is about unraveling mysteries, and because of that, this game very much expects you to pay attention, with many choices actively affecting how many points you obtain from story quests. Previous games, notably first chapter, certainly have mystery as a big part of their narrative, but it is a core aspect of Zero. There are tons of plot threads, suspicious individuals, intrigue, and everything you would expect from a mystery narrative. Now, I grew up with a lot of underdog buddy cop shows, and Zero does a good job of blending that genre into the Trails universe. And because of that, I think the story of this game is really well paced and doesn't really meander like Sky First Chapter and Cold Steel 1 later on tend to do. A lot can happen within a single chapter, and you are actually rewarded for paying attention and trying to unravel the mystery yourself, and because of this, I believe this is the best paced introductory game of the series by a country mile. And a lot of that is helped by a beautiful cohesion between the gameplay setting and narrative. Crossbell is super small compared to Liberal, being about 1/3 of its size, and because of that you actually get a lot more intimate with Crossbell as you go back and forth across the country. If I had to compare this to Sky First Chapter narratively, I'd say the first chapter has some far more impactful highs, but I find Zero to be a much more exciting game throughout its entire runtime, but this is a very different story than First Chapter, and I think which one you prefer will be largely up to preference, but I think one thing they both share is a great cast of characters. Let's start with the SSS. Ellie McDowell is the most level-headed one of the group, serving as the tactician and negotiator. Personality-wise, she's just kind of the level-headed nice girl, so she is probably the most boring, but she has a pretty great backstory that ties into the themes of the game, and she's important to the group, and I like her a lot. Then there's Randy Orlando, the bruh man. Randy is a laid-back big brother of the group and considers himself a bit of a playboy, though often he finds himself one-upped by Lloyd's natural charisma, and it leads to some funny moments. He originally worked with the Crossbell Guardian Force, basically the military, but his flirtatious attitude got him kicked out. He is no joke with his combat abilities though, and he often has some of the best lines. One of my favorite things about him is that he gives a lot of characters some fun little nicknames, and it's a really cute trait of his. And then there's the fan favorite, Tio Plato. She is an incredibly smart girl who is able to hack into anything. She can also detect changes in the elements, more on that later, and can also talk to animals. However, her most memorable trait is that she has a massive obsession with Mishi. Mishi is basically the mascot character of Crossbell, featuring his own amusement park, which feels like a bit of a parody of Disneyland, and he is adorable as heck. I legit bought the limited edition of Cold Steel 3 just to get one because, I mean, look at him! Look at him! Mishi also became a mainstay mascot for Falcom not too long after this game, and I figured it was worth noting his origin here. Going back to Tio, she is a huge Mishi fangirl, can recite Mishi lore to you, and also this is a really cute touch, but you can see a Mishi keychain under her ornament in the menu. In fact, you can see little personal touches on every character's ornament screen, which I find really endearing and cool. And then there's our main character, Lloyd Bannings. While he certainly doesn't have the bright energy of Estelle, he is a really likable guy. He is very smart due to his training to be a detective, and is also kind of a big ball of cheese. This man loves to give heroic speeches and is also kind of dense when it comes to the girls around him. But overall, Overall, if I had to use one word to describe Lloyd, it would be determined. He is a very confident person, and while at times it can make him less complex than other JRPG heroes, there's just this charisma to him, and I just like him a lot. There's more than one reason I wanted to cosplay as him. He's a cool guy and a strong contender with Estelle for my favorite Trails character. Also, while he's not playable, I'd be remiss not to mention Chief Sergei, the gruff supervisor of the group. He acts as the middleman between the special support section and the main department, allowing you to act with a bit more freedom. But I really like his gruff attitude, but he's not really a jerk about it either. He's just kind of a fun character and I like him a lot. Now, since this is a JRPG, the narrative reveals a lot more about these characters than I mentioned here, but you'll just have to play the game and find out. But I adore the special support section, and there are many other characters I also love in this game. First is Wazi Hemisphere and Walled Whales. Also, I just want to say that these names. These two run gangs in the South District of Crossbell known as the Testaments and Saber Vipers. Wazi is a calm and suave guy with a name that feels like it walked straight out of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, with his character design also reminding me of Bucciarati from Part 5. His gang are known as the Testaments, wearing all blue, with Wazi's right-hand man Abbas helping run it. Wald is a gruff man with a face that looks like it walked straight out of Bleach. He runs the Saber Vipers, your more traditional gangsters. I feel like I just set up a really weird shonen war by making these comparisons. Both of these characters actually have a lot of fun development over the course of these games, and I really like them a lot, especially Wazi. Noel Seeker is probably one of my top contenders for Best Girl. She is a member of the Crossbell Guardian Force and she's a big vehicle nut. Noel also has an airhead sister named Fran who works at the police station, and you meet her pretty early on. I like both of them a lot. And then there's Alex Dudley, or Doodles as I sometimes call him. He's a member of the Crossbell Police 1st Division, which looks into some more serious cases. He is a super by-the-book serious type, but underneath it he's a super caring guy. Then there's Rixia Mao, my actual best girl for the Trails series. I know, the most milquetoast take, but what can I say? She's a member of the Arc CL Theater group, which does performances in the entertainment district. She was picked up by the group leader Ilya, who is, touchy, but Rixia is dedicated to the group and she's cute. I don't want to say too much for now, but I really like what they end up doing with her. She needs to be in more games, man. Lastly, we have Arios MacLean. He is a masterclass S-rank bracer, just like Cassius in the last game, as well as a practitioner of the 8 leaves, 1 blade sword style, and the divine blade of wind. Suffice to say, Arios is awesome, and I actually like him a lot. He's a pretty chill guy and is considered the local hero of Crossbell. Arios also has a blind daughter named Shizuku, and they have a real wholesome dynamic. As far as the plot is concerned, he serves as a nice metaphor for the force that SSS is up against trying to one-up the bracers, since he is the best bracer around. There are so many characters I love and chose to gloss over here, as this game has a massive cast of characters overall, but I like most of them. The plot of the Crossbell games definitely has a lot more going on than the Sky games, but in my opinion it handles the juggling act very, very well. Also, unlike the other 2 Arc introductions, despite this game setting up the next game, the experience is pretty standalone. With the exception of one subplot. Alright, so I'm going to talk about that subplot now. So before I go into spoilers, I will say that there's one prominent subplot from the Sky games that was left hanging. If you played those games, especially Sky the Third, you probably already know what subplot I'm referring to. This game not only continues this subplot, but majorly develops it. This is the biggest problem of recommending Zero as a first Trails game, since you'll not only be missing some added context for the subplot, but it also spoils the Sky games, especially second chapter. So before I talk about this, please use this timestamp right here to skip some spoilers for the Sky games, as well as minor spoilers for this game. I will not be filtering the subplot anymore, so please use this timestamp right here to skip. Alright, are we good? Here we go. Estelle and Joshua are in this game. So if you played Sky 2nd Chapter and Sky the 3rd, this game continues the Ren subplot from the last 2 games. At the end of 2nd Chapter, Estelle and Joshua left on a journey to fight Ouroboros and look for Ren. After a small excursion in Erebonia I will talk about a different time, they arrived in Crossbell when they were sucked into Phantasma in Sky the 3rd. In Phantasma, they reunited with Ren, who joined the group to help them escape. During 3rd, you can learn her backstory, and at the end of the game, Ren had a last exchange with Estelle and Joshua, where they said they wanted her to join their family. After escaping Phantasma, they returned to where they were when 3rd began, retaining their memories of the adventure. Now, at the start of this game, Estelle and Joshua are in Crossbell searching for Ren, while Ren observes things from the shadows. Now, I won't say too much about the events in this game, but this subplot is just a whole truck of feels for anyone who played the previous games. I've seen some say that this subplot even ends up overshadowing the main characters, and while I understand that and even could kind of agree in a few places, I actually just love the way they managed to incorporate this plotline from the Sky games. The way it all paid off got me crying like crazy the first time I played this, and what sucks is it may not even mean much to someone who doesn't have the context of the previous games. But I do want to contest that the actions of our main party are vital to the payoff of this subplot, and I just want to make that clear. This isn't the Estelle Show 3.0, it's still very much the Special Support Section's game, just with the added bonus of Estelle, Joshua, and Ren here. One of my favorite parts of this narrative by far. Overall, I love the story of this game. It has a lot of exciting highs, with the most notable low being that Chapter 3 kind of goes on a little bit longer than the other chapters, which is not really a huge complaint, it's just something I noticed. Still, Chapter 3 has a lot of great moments during it, and I like the chapter a lot, but just felt it was worth mentioning. The entire second half of this game is one wild ride and has probably some of my favorite moments in the entire Trails series, with an ending that managed to make me cry again, which at this point I think the writers just know how to get me, and as the series' first foray outside of Liberl and its cast, I think they totally nailed it. Alright, I think that's enough about the story, let's talk about the gameplay. Let's start with Crossbell itself in a little more detail since we obviously spend most of the game exploring it. In the center of the country is Crossbell City, featuring multiple districts. Outside the city there's the 4 surrounding areas: the Aramarika Farm Village, St. Ursula Hospital next to Lake Elm, the Mainz Mining Village, and the Police Training Academy you can't go to in this game, but you can in Azure. Now, unlike Liberl, you are not locked to one region every chapter. Over the course of the game, you will slowly gain access to more and more of Crossbell, eventually opening up the entire region, with no points of no return up until the final chapter. Now, while that may sound like a lot of places to keep track of, it's surprisingly manageable. Like I said before, this is because of the size of Crossbell, as well as the fast travel options in this game. Inside of Crossbell City, you can select city locations from the map screen, and outside of Crossbell City, you can ride the bus to go between bus stops. It is incredibly convenient and speeds up backtracking immensely. Even then, traveling on foot doesn't take too long, especially with Turbo, and enemies don't scale up with your level for good chunks of the game, making older areas much easier to explore. The layout of Crossbell really reminds me of Majora's Mask, where you had Clocktown as a central hub with multiple regions branching out in 4 directions, making it not only easy to return to places, but also cutting down on fluff in the story and world design. Now, since the special support section is trying to function like bracers, this game is once again built around accepting quests. However, quests are still as missable as always, though I think they are a little more generous with when they expire this time around, but you'll still want to check the PC and the base as often as you can. There are still hidden quests in this game, but they're usually no more than 2 per chapter, but I don't think there's any shame in using a guide here in this situation. A jarring change coming off the Sky games is the removal of the free camera while exploring, but after playing this game I actually found myself not missing it too much. Since the camera and map designs are built around the fixed camera now, it's easy to digest everything and not get turned around. Plus, the camera in the Sky games was sometimes kind of bad, since it was stuck at a downwards angle, and that meant that especially in large fields it was very easy to get turned around, and this is an issue the Crossbell games never have. Now, fishing returns in this game, and despite me still getting over the existential horrors from last time, it's actually a fun time in this game. The fishing in this game works pretty much the same as Sky's second chapter, not much to say there aside from the fact that I can now confirm the timing is much more generous. Also, unlike second chapter, you actually get rewards for fishing this time around, and since you can now backtrack, I like fishing in this game a lot. This is also the game that officially cemented this as a mainstay side activity in the series, but I will have more to say about this in Azure. This is also where the gluttonous bass makes its triumphant first appearance. This fish is often referred to as the fish, and it's a bit of a meme in the community, and I love it. Cooking also returns in this game, but got a bit of a tweak this time around. First, you now learn recipes by reading books and talking to NPCs in missable windows, and you do not learn them from eating dishes. I'm actually not a fan of this change, though Azure also handles this a little differently, but I'll talk about that when we get there. But for a change I like a lot is now more than just Lloyd can cook. Now all 4 of your party members can cook, with each party member having different skill levels with different dishes. Additionally, you can get multiple results from the same recipe, meaning that there is RNG involved now, but it's fun to experiment with. Some of the dishes you can create shatter the game balance in 2, while some bad dishes in this game have some wacky side effects, like a dice roll between instant death and full CP. Starting from this game, I actually use the cooking mechanic more than I thought I would, and it's just a fun system. Now, I wasn't sure where best to slip this in, but this is also the game that introduced bonding points, though it is not executed quite like later games. In this game, it's sort of like the affection system in Final Fantasy VII or Tales of Symphonia. Basically, by choosing to bring certain party members in situations or fulfilling other requirements, you'll build bonding points with that character. If you build up enough, you can get a special scene with that character at the very end of the game. It's fun and definitely adds replay value. And also, there's this one scene that alters depending on how many quests you complete, and I just kind of find that one amusing in particular. So yeah, fun stuff. As you progress through the game, you can find little decorations and shops for everyone's rooms. This is not only a way to get bonding points, but is also a cosmetic that transfers to Azure, which I absolutely adore. Most notably Lloyd's boombox, which actually plays songs from the game when you interact with it. Earlier I mentioned how each character has a unique ornament keychain. Well, you can actually buy custom plates for your ornaments in this game on top of that. It's something that sticks around after this game, but it's a fun cosmetic to spend money on. Though there are only single plates you can buy in this game, meaning that they largely just exist as a way to get bonding points for your party in this game, but hey, it's neat. On the topic of the ornaments, I'm surprised at how they handled them coming back to this game. Basically, they went back to the 2-slot system from second chapter, which surprised me because I expected them to go back to the single slots like the first game, but no, this game gives you the 2-slot system, meaning that you have a lot more options in regards to handling your quartz loadout this time around, and I really dig that. If you did not see my Sky video, there's a whole element balance system that determines what arts you can use. If you want to see what spells you can get, there's a spell list in your notebook just like before. Once again, I go into this in much more detail in my Sky first chapter review, so watch that if you haven't. But since we're here, let's go ahead and talk about the combat. You guys know I've been waiting for this part. So a lot of what I'm about to talk about will sound new to Sky players, but familiar to Cold Steel players. So strap in because the amount of additions this game added to the combat is kind of wild. Trails from Zero's combat fundamentally plays like the previous games, and so because of that I won't repeat myself too much. If you want me to go into detail, you can watch my previous video, but I'll give the short version here. The combat is a turn-based battle system where actions have area of effect properties. You have character unique skills called crafts, and materia-esque magic called arts that have a casting time. The combat is also dictated by a dynamic turn order, with turn bonuses that appear on the wheel including stuff like guaranteed critical damage. Now there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but again watch the previous video to hear me explain in more detail, as this is built on the previous game's battle systems. Now because this is the beginning of a new arc, this is the first game to make some big sweeping changes to the combat. First, let's start with what they removed. The chain crafts from Sky's second chapter have been removed in favor of 2 new mechanics. A new mechanic I will talk about in a little bit, as well as a new team rush bonus on the turn wheel. When you get this bonus, all of your characters get to attack at once. However, if an enemy gets it, all enemies get an immediate turn, so watch out for that. The remote ability skill from third is also gone in this game, but given that your party is way smaller this time around, that's to be expected. Speaking of third, that game's turn bonuses have all been removed. Most of the time. There are instances where you'll enter a dungeon and Teal will mention that the higher elements are present. When that happens, it's third rules, baby. Space, time, and mirage arts are all included in the weakness typing, along with all the bonuses I talked about in third. This makes those bonuses a bit more situational and maintains the world building, which is really cool. I enjoyed third, but admittedly some of those turn bonuses could be kind of rage-inducing, so keeping that localized to certain dungeons is definitely for the best. Vanished. The one exception to this is the rush turn bonus, as you can encounter that anywhere now, not just in higher element places. Now this is where we get into the new stuff. First, crafts have gotten a pretty substantial buff in this game compared to prior, with many of them breaking this game's balance in two. But if you like arts, the element balance system is still very intact with not much change from before. Now my personal favorite addition is the combo crafts. This is a bit different from the chain crafts, as these are basically Team S crafts. You have to spend 100 CP for both characters, but they are super strong and really fun to set up for. The animations are also really neat, and as a Chrono Trigger fan, I'm a sucker for stuff like this. This game also contains a small but significant change to the UI compared to before. In the Sky games, you had to awkwardly navigate outside of the actual menu bar to activate someone's S-Craft, which took time and really was inconvenient. However, in this game, while holding down a button, you can select an S-Craft merely by clicking on the D-pad, saving you unnecessary reaction time. Another addition in this game is reserve party members. This mechanic is rarely used in this game, but is given a lot more legroom in Azure. Reserve characters will hang out in the back and can be swapped in outside of battle, which overall is a much needed change to how second chapter and third handled having more than 4 party members.
But wait! There's more!
However, your reserve party members participate in battle too. Occasionally you'll see reserve party members show up on the turn list, and when they get a turn they will usually have one of 2 actions they will take. These actions are unique to every character and can be pretty handy depending on the situation. It's really neat. Now for a small change that actually changes how combat can be played a lot is the introduction of a counterattack mechanic. When you or an enemy miss an attack, the target gets a guaranteed counterattack. While I won't give away why this is busted just yet, just take my word for it, it is, and it ain't going away anytime soon. Another great addition to this game are tactical bonuses at the end of fights. Depending on how you perform during battles, you will get a multiplier on the experience you obtain. The system is really nice because it actually rewards you for fighting well, and it is a mainstay after this game. Now, I didn't touch on this in the previous games because it kinda sucked in the Sky games, but there was a preemptive strike system in them. It was fine, I guess, but it needed a lot of refinement. Because of that, I often relied on quartz to stop enemies from spotting me altogether to keep my sanity in those games. That said, the Sky games did allow you to run away from all fights guaranteed, which is sweet considering you got jumped really easily in that game, but it definitely felt like a band-aid solution, that's for sure. Crossbell considerably revamps this system. The original preemptive system still exists, but now you can attack on the overworld to stun enemies. If you manage to stun them and then touch them from behind, you will get what is called a max advantage. When you get a max advantage, you either have 5 crits or a team attack at the start of a fight. This actually trivializes most encounters and is probably a bit too reliable once you get a feel for it, but it's still definitely preferable to the way Sky handled it. Additionally, you can freely swap your lead party members with the press of a button, and all of them have their own unique field attacks, and it's incredibly fun to experiment with. Additionally, if you are a way higher level than the enemy, they will run from you on the field now. When this happens, you can kill them with your regular attacks without even fighting them. Or if an enemy is your current level, you can just lock the enemy in place like... On the flip side though, if an enemy manages to get a jump on you, it is much more punishing. Unlike the Sky games, you no longer have guaranteed escapes, but a really nice quality of life change is the game shows you your percent chance of escape. If you do get jumped, you start at 0% and it goes up by 15% every attempt, so do try to avoid getting jumped where possible. But this game does keep the retry system of previous games though, so definitely use that if you need to. Though there is also no retry offset this time, so do be careful about that this time around. This game also introduces chain battles. If multiple mobs of enemies are nearby, you may find yourself doing multiple fights in a row. This simplifies the process of running into enemies for a bit, but it's something you want to keep in mind. Now I do have one criticism for the Crossbell games, and it's something they should have fixed 2 games ago. See that chain of party members? Well, they are part of your active hitbox, meaning it is very easy to get jumped. And unfortunately, it's still in this... So, in the PC and Switch ports, they added a brand new setting where your lead party member is the only one who can get jumped. While this makes getting preemptive strikes even easier now, this is an incredible change. To my surprise, this feature is also in the PS4 version, so PlayStation 4 players, you are still blessed with this change, and I am so happy they did this. Another fun tweak is the introduction of high-level monster chests. They will give you a level requirement so you know to come back later, but if you want to, you can challenge them early. This is fun considering most of Crossbell is available to you at all times, so you have ample objective to return to chests and try them again, and I love that. Now, I've already talked about all of the new mechanics and everything, but how is the actual balance of this game? Funny. Okay, so here's the deal. Trails from Zero starts off balanced closer to first chapter, but with the benefit of having a full party at all times, and having a decent selection of crafts. But as you progress through the game, you gain access to some insanely broken crafts. I'll go into this in more detail in Azure, but I want to highlight one skill in particular. That skill is Burning Heart, which is basically Dragon Ball's Kaioken. While active, Lloyd ignores status ailments, gets a pretty substantial buff to his attack and defense, and gets an immediate action when it's used. The downside is that after a few turns he does burn out for 1 turn. However, you can continuously reset if you have the CP, which you can very easily do with Gladiator belts. This move is incredibly cheesy and can shred some fights. This is one of the many reasons I think this game has a sharp difficulty drop compared to 3rd, at least after the prologue. Worth mentioning though, I am a huge Trails nut and I know the combat really well, so it could just be my experience with the series shining through here. Now with all of these additional mechanics and tweaks, and it's definitely a lot of them, I don't think I need to point out how much easier this game is than the previous 3. I will say that if you do pick this as your first Trails, you should probably play on normal, but if you are a veteran of the Sky series, hard might be more comfortable. Whereas Nightmare is still pretty intense, but definitely doable. Overall, the combat and general game loop just feels significantly more streamlined than the previous titles, and while some of the difficulty is gone as a consequence, I just have fun making the most busted builds possible, and this is where that really starts to get a focus in the series. Also, the S-crafts in this are as flashy as ever, and with the added combo crafts, it's just a visual treat using your moves in this game. On the topic of the S-crafts though, let's talk about the presentation. As you can tell, this game has the same visual style as the previous 3 games, though I think their skill with the engine has improved a lot with this game. Unlike Liberl, where a good chunk of the areas outside of towns are just kind of winding roads or overly spacious fields, Crossbell has a ton of very memorable set pieces to keep each region feeling distinct, and it feels very real and lived in as a result. After looking at some artwork I got from the special edition, I think most of these places are actually on model to existing concept art. They actually managed to preserve most of the detail in the artwork that I did see, which I find really impressive, and I really would like to see more art like this if it exists out there. On the topic of the artwork though, the art style of this game actually took a significant change from the Sky trilogy. Where Sky's art style had more of a 90s anime vibe, Crossbell feels a little more modern. This is because they hired Katsuni Inami as the artist for this game. He is famous for doing various artwork for different series, such as the character designs for Bakano, a light novel series with an anime I definitely recommend if you can find it. This man is currently my favorite artist to have worked on the Trail series so far, and I was really happy to hear that he got hired back to work on the Kuro games going on in Japan. This game also features full Japanese voice acting, but that wasn't always the case with this game. The original PSP and PC releases of this game had small snippets of voice acting, but they were largely text-based like the Sky games. It wasn't until the Evolution re-releases I will talk about later that they introduced full Japanese voice acting to the games, and this was one of the few features to survive the Evolution port. Now there is no English dub in this game, possibly so the NIS can focus on the upcoming Trails into Reverie. I do know people who are understandably disappointed that there's no English dub in this game, as there are a lot of diehard fans of the Cold Steel dub. But I actually adore the Japanese voice cast. Every voice actor has a lot of fun in their roles and really enhances the scenes as someone that originally played Zero with no voice acting. In particular, I'm a big fan of Lloyd's voice since it captures his cheesy personality perfectly.
そんなことは確かに今日はいろいろとへこまされることが多かった。でもそんなのは働いてれば当たり前のことなんだ。そして今日乗り越えられなかった壁は明日には乗り越えられるかもしれない。壁。
With Randy also being a big standout for me since he injects a lot of fun into every single scene.
ストライクの真ん中。よし、みなぎってきたぜ。いや、俺は幸せだな。お前みたいなマブダチと巡り合うことができて。というわけで、紹介よろしくね。
あのな。
But okay, on the topic of sound, we have finally arrived. You all knew I was going to talk about the soundtrack, so what do I think? I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. The music in this game is sort of a transition between the Sky games and the Cold Steel games as far as sound goes, and it's so good. So one thing I should mention about the Sky games is the soundtrack in those games was a lot more subdued and jazzy, whereas this definitely feels a lot more modern to reflect its current setting. This is one of the few soundtracks where I like pretty much every single song. There's a much larger emphasis on rock and epic orchestration for the battle themes, with each of the surrounding regions having its own overworld theme. Even the cutscene music is a bop sometimes in this game, with an early standout being the Crossbell Police Department theme. It uses a type of synth piano that I don't actually hear that often that I associate with Mega Man Star Force, which is another soundtrack I adore, so that's a huge compliment from me. This one was really hard for me to pick a good enough sample to represent how good the soundtrack is in my opinion, but I'll just go ahead and share some of my favorites for the sake of time, so here we go. There's the Geofront theme, having this subdued industrial feel to it with a melody that feels like it's fighting its way to the surface. The main battle theme, Get Over the Barrier, truly capturing Lloyd's determination. And my personal favorite track in the game, and a lot of people's personal favorite, Inevitable Struggle. music in this game has all the right combination of atmospheric tracks, chill tracks, and catchy tracks, and has yet another final boss theme that just slaps. I won't share any more tracks because this video is already long enough as it is, but Intense Chase, Arrest the Criminal, pretty much any of the area themes, just everything, I love this soundtrack so much. This soundtrack is easily in my top 3 Trails soundtracks, and if you play this game, you'll hear nothing but bangers. Now before we wrap this up, there's a few other things I want to mention, so let's go ahead and do that. First of all, books make a return in this game. My favorite being Back Alley Dr. Glenn, a pretty enjoyable read set in the country of Remiferia. There's also a library with a collection of short stories you can keep up with, such as Mark and the Witch of the Deep Forest. Also returning is the Crossbell Times, which is basically like the liberal news from the Sky games. It's just nice to have all of this back. This game also brings back the chess messages, which I am so happy about. Xseed and After That NIS were largely unable to implement this joke into the Cold Steel games, so it makes me very happy that they went and brought it back for this. Shockingly, they actually kept a lot of the chess messages from the Geofront version, and I love that. Though I gotta say, they baited us so bad. The first 2 chests only say the chest is empty, so I legitimately thought that they had removed them, but no, it was only the first 2 chests, so you guys got me good. Good job. Now, I mentioned in the last video how NPCs in Liberal updated over the course of the chapters, and that you could follow entire subplots with them. Well, Crossbell does the same thing, but with the entire region. NPCs all over Crossbell have entire game-long subplots you can keep up with if you invest the time. These subplots will carry over into the sequel, and it's such an insane attention to detail. Now, keeping up with all of them is a very big ask, and I don't recommend it to everyone, and it will almost certainly double your playtime if you try to, but I'd say early on to pick the ones you do want to follow, and it'll improve your experience immensely. For me, I really love the duo of Bennett and Oscar in the Morg's Bakery. Bennett considers Oscar her rival and is always trying to outbake him, but over the course of the games you realize that there may be a little bit more going on there. It's cute. There's also a little girl named Jingo who helps out with her mom's weapon shop. She has a rude attitude and a bad mouth, but has some funny moments I really like across both this game and Azure. This game also brings back New Game Plus, but with a crucial difference. See, like with any modern game, this game has achievements. However, those achievements are also in the game itself, each giving you points. After beating the game, you can spend those points on New Game Plus features, artwork, and other perks. This is somewhat similar to the grade system in the Tales of games. Now, I imagine this may be divisive for some people since the Sky games just let you choose what you want without requiring you to overachieve, but I personally just like that you have tangible rewards for achievement hunting in this game, and it's the first game I've ever platinumed. That said, this directly leads into a small list of things I don't like about this game, which is not much to be honest. I just really like this game overall, but it's worth mentioning. First of all, despite working with Geofront's script, NIS let a decent amount of typos slip into the final product. In all fairness, the scripts of these games are massive, and it's kind of inevitable that some would slip through if you ask me. I know some people really hate this, but I do think a lot of these will be fixed up in patches, so I'm not too torn up over it. I think the funniest one to me is when you get your ultimate weapon, or as I will call them now, the color text weapons. On that note, I brought up that I platinumed this game. Well, that took 5 playthroughs on New Game Plus for me to do it. That meant to true 100% this game, I had to get all color text weapons, all achievements, and all upgraded combo crafts from the final bonding events. Now, if you optimize things a little better, you could probably do it in 4 playthroughs, but that's still 4 playthroughs. While it doesn't take too long to replay this game and get the other bonding events, around 6 to 8 hours per run depending on if you do a bunch of side quests, it is certainly not ideal. Adding on to this, to get every color text weapon you have to collect every single Back Alley Dr. Glenn book and trade it in at the very end of the game. This is something the later Trails games do as well, but it led to my speedruns being oriented around talking to NPCs in very specific windows, and I don't think everyone would be willing to do this. But hey, this is still leagues better than completing Sword of Mana at least. Something I did not expect to be impressed by coming back to this game is the dungeon designs. A lot of the places in this had a bunch of thought put into player progression. While it's not quite on the level of Golden Sun or anything, I think this game had some of the better dungeon designs I've encountered in a turn-based RPG. To get specific, any Geofront dungeon is a highlight of the game for me. There's a lot of complex passageways, valves to activate, paths that open up, level design that loops around. It's just the right combination of confusing and fun, and I did not expect to praise that here. There's also a Geofront dungeon that is exclusive to New Game Plus, and it's probably the best of the Geofront dungeons. Though it does kind of suck that it is exclusive to New Game Plus, but it gave me something to do on the second go around, so hey, I didn't mind it. Sorry, I guess I was supposed to be talking about negatives here, well. Honestly, the fact that I was willing to do those replays at all should say everything about how much I love this game, and I will probably replay it again in the future at some point, especially as mods come out for it. Fantastic game. Back in 2020, Trails from Zero was everything I hoped it would be. While I will admit I was most excited at the time to get into the Cold Steel games, this game completely won me over. After revisiting this game, I still love it. This game manages to take the formula and gameplay format of the Sky games and evolves it. The story has a lot more consistent and exciting story beats, the combat is more fun than it has ever been, the music is amazing, and this game manages to take the presentation style of the Sky games to the next level with an incredibly memorable setting. I've seen some people say that they think this is one of the weaker Trails story-wise, but I cannot disagree enough. I find the mystery angle pretty enticing, the political themes intriguing, the characters likable. Really not much I can say wrong about this one aside from saying that maybe some of the character building in the Sky games is better, and maybe the swerve at the end of this game is a little sudden for some people, but I loved it. But just to make one thing clear, I still think Trails in the Sky first chapter is the best starting point for appreciating the narrative. However, I think the way this game handles the subplot could still be enjoyed by a newcomer if you ask me, but if you're a fan of the previous games, the subplot of this game is something you really need to experience and you're missing out if you don't. Also, as someone that does play these games for the gameplay to a large extent, I just think this is a fun game. They expanded the battle system and the overworld exploration in some phenomenal ways. If you like the combat in the last few games, you might be in for a treat, and if you are a fan of the later games, you are also in for a treat. As for the main story and experience, I think this is a solid as heck game, and I'm very glad it managed to, officially this time, get over the barrier. I want to thank Geofront so much for doing the original translation. If it weren't for them, I may not have even been able to play these games in English whatsoever. We don't even know if the NIS version would even exist, or at least come out as quickly as it did. And despite a messy pre-release period, NIS did pull together a really great adaptation of Geofront's original script, and the new additions on PC and Switch really make the game feel fresh, and is probably the best version of the game to date, barring like one feature that the Geofront had that I did not expect them to add anyway, so that's okay. Really great version, good job. This game is currently going for a full $40, which is a little more than third, but given all of the changes, additions, and replay value, I think that is a very solid price. This game is not as long as second chapter, but it still has plenty of content. Not to mention all versions feature full Japanese voice acting, which the original Geofront version did not have at default. So get it, support the games, just maybe not the PS4 version if the added features really matter to you. This is easily the longest I've ever gushed about any of these games so far, and this is only my third favorite Trails game. But now that we have gotten over the barrier, the only thing left to do is to seize the truth. That said, before we go into Trails to Azure, I want to take a bit of a detour to talk about the Evolution ports. I mentioned the Evolution re-releases before, so I may as well go ahead and explain what those are. Shortly after the Cold Steel games started to be released on the Vita, Falcom reached out to Kadokawa Games to create remasters of every single game from Sky FC through Azure for the platform. Remasters that have not been released in the West. So in order to give my impressions of these, I went out of my way to set up a Japanese PSN account on my PS TV to download some demos for these. I love you guys, you're all great, please support me on KoFi. Now what separates these versions from the other releases is that they not only gave them a visual overhaul, but also made many changes to standardize the games. So let's break down what's different. The Sky games got new portraits and artwork to make it more consistent with the Crossbell games, with said portraits actually animating, which is pretty neat. All 5 games, including Crossbell to a lesser extent, received full Japanese voice acting for almost everything aside from NPCs, which is very impressive. The music was also rearranged as well, being done both internally by Falcom and people outside of the company. That said, the music is probably the most divisive part of these releases, especially in the Sky games. Some of the music chose to kick the grandiose up to 1000, and while that works for some songs, it doesn't for others. If you have seen my Mana reviews, it's very much a Secret of Mana remake situation here. For example, here's the original battle theme from second chapter. And here's the Evo version. Then there's the fishing theme from third. And here's the Evo version. Anyway, this is just a small sample to give an idea of how different these songs can get in the Sky Evos. Other changes to the Sky games include nearly everything from the Crossbell games. That's right, field attacks, turn bonuses, the menus, easy character swapping on the field, Crossbell's battle UI, and even things from the Cold Steel games such as Zero Arts are all here in Sky. Though to my surprise, they did not add the evade counter mechanic to the Sky games, so that's one area where they were surprisingly faithful. These versions also introduced 2 brand new bonuses, Bad Attacks and Zero Crafts. Bad Attacks give a guaranteed random status ailment to whoever gets hit on that turn with a physical attack, while Zero Crafts set the CP consumption to 0 for that turn, meaning that you can throw out any crafts, including S-Crafts, for no cost, which is very funny. As for Zero and Azure's re-releases, they are a bit less ambitious. Aside from the aforementioned voice acting, the gameplay is unchanged as far as I know, and the portraits are the same as before, only animated now. They also redid the soundtracks for these two, and while I do miss the Star Force synth in some tracks, this is a bit of a hot take, but these are largely solid remixes of the original soundtrack, with the exception of a few songs across both games. In fact, I might say that Azure's Evolution soundtrack in particular does a really good job of remixing the original soundtrack, and I actually prefer a few of the Evo songs for that one, so again, good stuff. The Evolution versions of these games also added some cool mini-games where you can actually interact with Randy's dartboard, for example, and they also introduced brand new quests that were not in the original. The worst thing about playing these versions is that there's no turbo feature, meaning exploration is significantly more of a slog in these versions. Though there is a battle animation speed up button in the Sky games, it has a bit of a startup, which I'm not a fan of. Surprisingly, there's actually no way to speed up fights at all in the Crossbell evolutions, so in my opinion this kind of makes the Evo versions of these one of the worst ways you can experience the games, as speed up options are kind of a necessity for this series if you ask me. Now, something unique to these Evolution ports are brand new opening animations. While some openings are fine, some of these Evolution openings are some of the worst openings I have ever seen. They are very prone to spoilers, with second chapter and Azure's openings being the worst about it by far. I do not recommend watching these till you finish the games at all. You will be spoiled. Don't watch them. Overall, I can't really recommend these ports since they are stuck on a dead platform and don't have an English translation. While some of the additions to the Sky games are nice, I feel the cons of searching them out far outweigh the pros. But if you want some of these features for the Sky games, if you don't mind some modding, you are not totally out of luck here. This is because you can actually mod several aspects of the Evolution releases onto the Steam ports. Confession, I actually used the Evo voice mod for second chapter and third, which actually helps spice up my replays. The reason I didn't talk about this there is that most people likely won't be experiencing the games that way. Modding can be kind of difficult for some people, and I wanted to keep the first video simple for newcomers. Plus, I didn't use this mod at all in my original playthroughs, and I enjoyed them just fine without the voice acting. But if you can figure it out, I definitely recommend the voice acting mod because it does actually enhance several scenes, though there are definitely moments where you can clearly tell they took liberties with the script. Now, for some less popular mods, there are the Evolution portraits, cutscene CGs, and the soundtrack. These will definitely make the games feel a little bit more like the Evolution versions, though worth noting that the Evolution portraits are not animated. Personally speaking, I don't really like the Evolution art style that much, at least on Estelle, but it's something you could do if that appeals to you. Now, there are actually some mods for the Crossbell games as well, such as one that actually restores the Evolution quests to the games, and I actually find that one really impressive in particular and definitely worth checking out. There's also a really cool set of mods by Kiseki that adds portraits to several NPCs in Zero and Azure, so I definitely recommend that as well. It's not really an Evo mod, but I definitely think it will enhance your playthrough. Anyway, that is pretty much everything from the Evolution ports. I wanted to explain it right here because it is actually a lot easier to explain once I've established everything that Zero has added to the formula, so again, hope you guys understand. Anyway, that is enough of that detour, let's move on. Trails to Azure is my favorite RPG of all time. For the longest time, that honor went to Golden Sun: The Lost Age, and I said as much in my review of that game. However, now that I've replayed Azure, it is so incredibly good. But what kept it from being my favorite before? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it, but at the time, second chapter left such a strong impact on me that it made it hard for Azure to compete with it. It was only after playing some of the later games that Azure continued to grow bigger and bigger in the back of my mind, leading us to today. So let's begin. Just like last time, I am primarily looking at the Steam PC release of the game, thanks NIS, though I did purchase a Switch copy and can confirm that everything that is on PC is also on Switch. Though it seems that once again, the PS4 version is just a straight translation of the Kai release, so keep that in mind if you plan on buying that version. I also want to make it clear that Trails to Azure, much like Sky's second chapter before it, is a direct sequel. Now, luckily the ending of Zero is a lot more merciful, which means I can talk about this a lot easier without spoiling things, but the game itself does spoil the events in Zero, so keep that in mind. But if you absolutely want to go into Azure with no spoilers whatsoever, just know this is one of the most impactful RPGs I have ever played, and they added a lot of gameplay that makes this easily one of my favorites in the entire series. If you have not played it, please do so now, and I'll see you when you come back. Now before we continue, I really want to take a moment to commend NIS and Geofront for their translation job this time. I mentioned before how Zero released with a whole bunch of translation issues in regards to typos and untranslated text. Well, I can confirm that aside from one hiccup that is still present on PS4, I didn't really notice any major typos this time. So all I gotta say is good job, guys. With all that said, I am really excited to talk about this one, so let's go ahead and seize the truth and talk about the second game in the Crossbell duology, Trails to Azure. As previously mentioned, Trails to Azure is a direct sequel to Trails from Zero and is once again set in the same region of Crossbell. Similar to Sky's second chapter, you can transfer your save data from Zero, allowing you to bring over Lloyd's level, room collectibles, and upgraded combo crafts. Additionally, NPCs that you interacted with in the last game remember you, with some giving minor rewards for completing quests in Zero. This game also gives additional bonding points as rewards for reaching maximum bonding points from the last game, which actually goes a good way towards trying to complete the bonding achievements, but I'll go into that later. I would make the argument that transferring your data in this game actually gets you more rewards than the Sky games did, and I find that really impressive because SC already did more than most games would do with this sort of system, and I love this sort of thing. But now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the story. Trails to Azure is set 3 months after the end of Trails from Zero. The special support section is temporarily disbanded while the group prepares for turbulent times in Crossbell. Now while this event was not shown on screen, there was a drama CD that was released along with the Japanese collector's edition of Azure that does show this event in a little bit more detail. While it did have some really nice scenes, my favorite being a scene with Randy that dealt with the fallout of the last game, you do not need to experience this at all to understand the bigger picture here, which is more than I could say for later drama CDs. At the start of this game, the special support section is reinstated with Lloyd and Ellie returning, as well as 2 new members, Noel Seeker and Wazi Hemisphere, characters who were guest party members in the last game but join as full party members in this title. And the SSS will need the added support because much like second chapter, the stakes have raised significantly in this game. I mentioned in the Sky review how there was an element of geopolitics involved in later Trails games, and this is the game where that really becomes a heavy focus. After the events in the last game, tensions between Crossbell and its neighbors have been on the rise. Between Erebonia to the west, Calvard to the east, a Jaeger Corps moving into the city, and an all too familiar snake-like organization lurking in the shadows, things have definitely begun to escalate in Crossbell. Though not every force approaching Crossbell is malicious, as some familiar faces also arrive in the country. Now, like the last game, characters from the Sky Trilogy do make an appearance in this game, and I do not want to spoil who exactly, but it is incredibly well thought out, and I absolutely love the additions. One of which actually caught me by surprise, and is probably the best kept secret of the entire game, and I'm a big fan of it. Along with the Sky characters, there are even some Cold Steel characters in this. Now, some of these are additions that were made after the fact in the PS4 version and are fairly minor all things considered, but it's really cool to see. I could see someone saying this potentially damages the original's artistic integrity, but I feel they all fit in rather naturally and it made sense to include them. Also, as someone that played the Geofront version before this, I actually really like seeing these characters react to the events in this game, and it made everything feel a lot more connected. Now, just like Second Chapter developed its own secondary characters, this game also chose to develop its own secondary cast. At the start of this game, as mentioned before, the group has been split up. This is so you are forced to really get to know Noel and Wazi better, both in regards to their character and the gameplay, which is pretty clever. Though of course Randy and Tio do rejoin the group, with Randy in particular getting some really great moments in this narrative. Ellie and Tio do not get a whole lot of development in this game though, and I've seen that get some heat. Personally, I think some people tend to ignore that they had their development in Zero, and characters like Zin had nothing to do with first chapter either, so it's really not a problem for me. Additionally, I think this allows the new members of the special support section to get a little bit more focus in this title. For example, a character that really grew on me on this replay was Wazi. On my first playthrough, Wazzy wasn't one of my favorites. A lot of the time he felt like a really watered down Olivier in terms of personality, only a bit less bombastic. But after this replay, I realized there was a good amount of depth to him. He's a very interesting character who bounces off the rest of the cast really well, especially Lloyd and Randy. Also, despite me already liking her, Noel really grew on me while replaying this game. Now, I mentioned before that she was a bit of a carnut, but my favorite trait of hers is that she could be kind of oblivious too, with a really funny moment where Randy and Wazzy spat out some innuendos, with Noel taking a second to process what they said. It was very funny and cute. Personally, while Risha may still have my best girl pick, I actually ship Lloyd and Noel the most. They have a really cute dynamic and I really love it. Though if I have any complaint, Noel's backstory gets elaborated in a lot of missable NPC dialogue, which is not the best, but I'd argue her arc still works even if you miss them. Outside of the special support section, we also get development for characters such as Wald, Risha, and other characters like Soli, who was a side quest character in the last game. Lloyd doesn't really get much development in this game, which does get some heat from some detractors I've met, but here's the thing, I love him in this game so much. Things in this game get really rough, and Lloyd's determination is constantly tested, but he does his best in the face of it, and it's genuinely inspiring. Don't bully my boy. Anyways, there are a few characters last time I chose not to mention, but I'll go ahead right now. I'm actually about to drop some major spoilers for Trails from Zero right here, so go ahead and skip, and I'll see you guys when I talk about the villains. I actually called this twist, and this is the exact moment I fell in love with Risha. Risha was revealed in the last game to be the assassin Yin from Calvard, and this creates an interesting dynamic anytime she appears in this game. Now, Risha is kind of well known in the fanbase, mostly for kind of degenerate reasons, but putting that aspect of her aside, this game shows that she has an internal conflict. On the one hand is tradition, and the other is her love for her new family with Ark and CL. Risha spends both of these games living her double life, and the plot of this game actually tests that aspect of her a lot, and it's really compelling. Now, is it original? Probably not, but I think there's a lot more to her than people give her credit for. Next is Zeit. Zeit is a sentient wolf who cannot talk directly but joins the special support section as their unofficial police dog, and I love him. And the other character is Kia. Kia is a little girl with no memories of her past who was adopted by the special support section about halfway through Zero, and quickly worked her way right into the heart of the group. Kia is one of the most adorable characters I've ever met in a JRPG, with one optional scene in this game being the fattest dose of diabetes I have ever seen. However, she has a lot of mystery surrounding her too, including her name. I mean, look at that, why is it spelled that way? Well, we actually never get an answer for that one, surprisingly, but Kia does get her own arc in this game, and I won't say too much about it, but I'm a big fan of it. But that said, let's take a hard pivot back to the plot by moving on to the villains. So in second chapter, they introduced the Society of Ouroboros, adding a driving force disguised plotline. But Azure isn't content to just bring back the old villains, but also a new group. The Jaeger Corps mentioned previously, the Red Constellation led by Sigmund and his daughter Shirley. It's one thing to have an organization that you already know is up to no good, but if you add political powers and a terrifying second group of villains to the mix, well, you get a strong sense that something bad is going to happen, but not how, which definitely adds to the suspense. Now, I'll go ahead and say that Shirley is probably the most controversial character in this game, and I don't want to totally touch on that because it's a bit like kicking a bee's nest. I'll just say that in the context of this game, she is absolutely terrifying, and I think that's the main takeaway they wanted. Despite that, I don't actually have much to say about her dad Sigmund. I mean, he is definitely intimidating and works really well as an antagonist, but as a character, he is slightly less interesting than Shirley in my opinion, but that's how I feel anyway. Now from Ouroboros, we have the returning Campanella, as well as the new character, Arianrhod. Now for Arianrhod, I mostly find her cool more than anything. Her design and premise remind me a lot of characters from the Fate franchise, and if you have watched anything from Fate, you probably know what I mean. This is also the game that officially set in stone the precedent that when these games hype up a character, it's a warning. I won't say too much more than that, other than the fact that I had fun with it. The story of this game has the highest stakes of any Trails game up to this point and manages to get pretty intense at points in ways that at the very least Sky FC and SC did not reach. It has all kinds of twists, turns, impactful moments, and characters that just left a really strong impression both on me and the games after this. In fact, I might make the argument that this might be the most important Trails game in the entire series, and it kind of blows my mind that they waited this long to localize this game. The effects of this game's plot ripple into so many games after this, and it's kind of insane. Now, the biggest complaint I probably have with this story is that the final chapter is incredibly long. I'd argue it is an entire fourth of the game, possibly more, so it's probably a good idea to take breaks during that chapter because it took me around 5 different play sessions to beat that chapter, but I was engaged the whole way through and I cannot recommend it enough. If you wanted a Trails game that definitely had a lot more exciting story beats on the regular, this is the game for you. Anyway, that was quite a lot I had to say about the story, so let's talk about the gameplay. Now, just like the last game and second chapter before it, exploration and quests are pretty much the same as always. A difference, however, is that you have full access to the region more or less from the get-go this time. On top of that, you get a company card that allows you to fast travel anywhere you want without the need for a bus, and I love this thing. You can also still use the buses if you want to, though I mainly use them to quickly return to your car as the car does not travel to where you are. Now, I'm sure this could be made more convenient, but it hardly was ever an issue for me personally. You can also customize your car in this game, which is kind of rad. You can buy all kinds of cosmetics for it, including a paint job that shows you have no shame. While most of the upgrades for your car are cosmetic, there are upgrades that allow it to refill your HP, MP, and even craft points. Once you get the last one in particular, you never have to use an inn ever again, and it's kind of insane. This actually made farming Sepith from Shining Palms very easy to do since you could go back and forth between the same 4 screens and refill your craft points. If these things weren't infinite, I'm pretty sure this would 100% count as poaching at this point. May the palms fear the Teomobile.
Well, we mustn't keep our public waiting, huh?
It's showtime, Phil.
As for the cooking, it works more or less the same as the last game, only you have more characters to work with this time. That said, there's one change that I actually like a lot. Unlike last game, you can now learn recipes by finding cookbooks and posters out on the field, with most of them available basically the whole game. Though I definitely recommend you do grab them ASAP because there are a few that do disappear. I vastly prefer this to Zero system since this is a lot more fair and generous, and what kills me is that every game after this uses Zero's system. Man. However, I do want to give a special shout out to the side quests in this game because this game has probably my favorite side quests in the entire series. There's a fun train chase with an old lady that always gets a laugh out of me, a subplot involving some buttheads from the Republic who get away with crimes due to being foreigners, and quests involving some beloved characters from Sky who make a return. There's also a questline in this game that pays off a backstory from the Sky games, and I love that. Monster hunting quests were fine in the older games, but in this game you unlock a combo craft every single time you complete one. Now how these monsters got these scrolls, I have no idea, but getting something so powerful from beating a monster fight feels incredibly rewarding, and I'm a big fan of it. There are also hidden quests involving a blind traveling reporter named Marcel Nielsen. I actually really advise that you do all of these quests specifically because it does affect the narrative, and I will leave it at that. But it is also very easy to miss these quests, so once again use a spoiler-free guide if you can. Now, something this game expands on is the game-long fishing subplot, and this is probably the best incarnation of it. While Zero technically started it, this is the first game to attach some story to it. The Fisherman's Guild, after taking a hiatus, finds itself suddenly taken over by the Imperial Fishing Club, and you have to help them take it back by outfishing the Imperials. To do so, you have to catch every fish you can and challenge the Elite Four of the Fisherman's Club. It is such an absurd idea for a long-term quest, but not gonna lie, eventually completing it and getting their guild back for them felt really nice to do. But I could see a lot of people pass on it even though the reward for it is pretty worth it. Outside of the fishing quest though, they actually introduced a game-long minigame you can play against other characters. If you are a big fan of Puyo Puyo, allow me to introduce Palm Party. In this minigame you have to match up colored palms in order to delete rows. If you manage to chain multiple deletes, you will fill up a craft point meter. You can then use this meter either to erase the bottom rows defensively or to fill up the enemy's rows offensively. This is actually my favorite minigame in the entire Trail series up to this point, and it's really fun. I especially like how you get to choose how to use your combo points, and it adds a little bit of strategy. Now usually when developers make knockoff minigames, they tend to not be as fun as the original, but I think this is a pretty fun time sink. I definitely spent a lot more time playing Palm Party than was necessary on this replay. But that said, I definitely recommend that you do both of these quest lines because they actually reward you with the best gear in the game. What is that gear? Well, let's get into that juicy combat. Now I gushed like crazy in the last game about the combat, but this is the game where the Trails combat really peaks for me. Let's go into why. Much like how Sky's second chapter improved on the gameplay of first chapter, this is the game that takes the combat from zero and brings a few major additions. Additions that may surprise you if you are a fan of the Cold Steel games. Well, let's start with how they rebalanced the cast. Now last time I praised Zero and how it played, but if you are wanting a challenging experience, it was probably one of the easier games in the series. Now this is due to many reasons, but the main one is that they made the crafts way too good in that game. So the first thing Azure does is nerf the crafts. Randy's Smoke Bomb dropped from 100% blind to 30% blind, Tio's Guaranteed Freeze got a similar debuff, and Lloyd's Burning Heart doesn't buff him nearly as much. Now by the late game, these crafts will power up again, with Lloyd's Burning Heart becoming even more OP than it was in Zero if you can believe it, but since you don't get that kind of power early on, it's safe to say that this game has a much better difficulty curve, with the late game being pretty challenging on hard despite the restored crafts. Not as difficult as third in my opinion, but definitely up there. But moving on from the main four, as mentioned before, we have some new permanent members of the special support section, so let's talk about them. Null Seeker has an area of effect range like Tio and Tita before her, allowing her to hit multiple enemies. But she also comes with crafts that can inflict AT delay and lower enemies' movements, making her great for support. Similar to Randy's Smoke Bomb, Null has a Sleep Grenade craft. This allows her to attack multiple enemies with a 60% chance to put them to sleep. Now unlike Blind, Sleep goes away when an enemy is hit, meaning this is mostly useful in a pinch if you need time to buff or regroup. Now towards the end of the game, this move stops being as useful when most encounters start to just resist every kind of status ailment. Though her AoE is still good for widespread damage, she definitely isn't as good as she is early on. Wazi is interesting. He is a brawler with a single target S-craft, which kind of makes him not the best for physical attacks. However, he has an AoE impede craft, which I found very useful in some quests and chest encounters. He also has a natural affinity towards magic, much like Olivia in the Sky games, which made him one of my favorite mages. Now the combo crafts got the biggest improvement over the last game. In the last game, Randy, Tio, and Ellie could only get combo crafts with each other at the very end of the game. However, as previously mentioned, your external party members start getting combos with each other as early as Chapter 1, and additionally, due to a retooling of the final bonding event system, you are free to use them as much as you want, and they are amazing. I often found myself using combo crafts more than S-crafts due to their damage output and range. They are so insanely good. Additionally, all those upgraded combo crafts from the end of Zero transfer over to this game, and it made all of those New Game Plus playthroughs I did feel very, very worth it. That said, I think I've talked enough about the refinements, so let's go ahead and talk about some new stuff, starting with a mechanic called Burst. Burst shows up during key moments in Azure and isn't a consistent mechanic, but when it's present you have a meter in the corner of the screen that gradually fills as you attack things. When it's full, you can activate it and your entire party gets damage multipliers, immediate turns, and instant casting for the duration of the meter. You can also consume items to fill up the meter, which can be pretty busted when used at the right time. I personally found myself using spells the most while doing Burst, since you can instant cast anything, and due to the damage multipliers, let's just say that you can melt some fights if you use their weaknesses. On top of the magic though, let's talk about this game's biggest gameplay addition, the Master Quartz. Master Quartz are a bit different from regular quartz in the fact that they can level up like materia from Final Fantasy VII and have a designated spot in your orbment. They also carry various stat increases which can substantially affect the stats of who you equip them to. Additionally, they all have unique gimmicks too, and they are very fun to mess around with. Scepter, for example, has a passive where attacking things makes the enemies drop Sepith, with the drop rate increasing with every level up the quartz gets. Ignis allows the user to start off a battle with max guard, allowing them to tank hits, and Mobius allows you to mob all over your allies, increasing the strength and range of items. Also, when Mobius is fully leveled up, it gives an AoE property to items, which means yes, you can use one Zerum capsule on your whole party and they all get full craft points. It is insane. In my opinion, the best Master Quartz in the game are Chevalier and Magius. These are obtained from the Fishing Quest and Palm minigames respectively, and they increase damage dealt by up to 2 times as HP drops. Chevalier in particular, when used in conjunction with Randy's Warcry craft, allows Randy to do some massive damage with his S-crafts, and I absolutely love it. It's so broken. The main downside of Master Quartz is that it can take a while to max out their levels, but if you do manage to level up one all the way, you gain access to a Master Art. These are very powerful with varying effects, but may leave a party member unable to act for a substantial period of time. That said, if they are used in the right situation, they are totally worth it. My favorite of these increases your craft point gain and massively boosts the attack power of your active party, allowing the damage you do to shoot up immensely. I managed to take out a substantial chunk of the final boss's HP on hard with one of Randy's S-crafts by doing a combo of attack buffs, Burst, the Chevalier gimmick, and a Master Art multiplier with a 200 CP meter. Yes, you can do that if you want to. It is very funny. These Master Quartz honestly can kind of break the game in two if you know what you are doing, and I think this is the main reason the endgame, especially the final boss, really clap you on hard if you don't play carefully, and I'm a big fan of it. Personally, I love the Trails games that are balanced this way. You really feel a tangible sense of reward for mastering the combat, and when it really clicks, it feels like you are outsmarting the game, and in a way I don't really see most turn-based RPGs do, and it's an incredible feeling. Now in regards to the ornament system, it is pretty much the same as it's always been, though in this case the master chords do have their own Sepith values, so keep that in mind if you're going for a specific build because the master chords will contribute towards that. Though worth mentioning, this is the last game with the traditional ornament system, meaning that they do completely retool it after this. But after 5 games of having the system, I definitely think it left on a high note. Alright, I've put off talking about this part long enough. It's time to talk about probably one of the most in-depth aspects of Trails to Azure, the bonding system. Get comfy guys, we're gonna be here for a bit. Hi, Dad! This game returns the bonding point system from the last game, only instead of 3 potential characters to build points with, this game has 12. Yes, 12. Did I stutter? Like the last game, there are final bonding events with each of your playable party members, with each party member getting upgraded combo crafts. Meanwhile, the remaining characters will have a small scene, and those characters will give you accessories for building bonding points with them, with some accessories being better than others. Now this sounds bad, and in some ways, it is, but there are a few key ways this game actually makes this a bit better, and that was building a solid chunk of the game around this system. See, unlike Zero, this game is a lot more involved with a lot of opportunities to build points. Because of how involved this can get, I definitely recommend using a guide if you want to optimize your first playthrough, but what really helps is the intermission chapter. The intermission chapter is an entire chapter dedicated to farming bonding points. This chapter has 2 halves, a literal anime beach episode which, yep, it's definitely a beach episode, and the other half is Mishalam Wonderland, a theme park with 4 attractions. The horror coaster, a fortune teller, a wish-granting mirror, and a Ferris wheel. This section actually has an impressive amount of changing dialogue depending on the attraction. The fortune teller, for example, will always ask you 2 questions, meaning that you have 24 possible interactions with her alone, which is an insane amount of dialogue. And some of them are pretty funny too, such as Tia who asked what her compatibility with Mishi is, which led to some funny foreshadowing for a later quest. On my first playthrough, I actually spent around 1/4 of my possible points here on the NPC characters such as Fran, Ilya, and Kia, so I could get their accessories and otherwise follow the guide for the rest of the game. By the end of the game, I had gotten every single final bonding event and accessory except for Tio and Ellie. If I had optimized things a little bit better, it's very likely I could have gotten everyone, which is genuinely impressive. I think the biggest lifesaver is that you can now see how far along your bonding points are on the record screen in the PC and Switch versions, which helps a lot in gauging who to spend points with. It's actually kind of fun in a way, routing how I want to spend points during the intermission, and it definitely adds a lot to the game. Now there is one aspect I should mention about the final bonding events in this game is that there are 3 characters whose entire backstories are either given more clarity in these bonding events, or they are outright not explored in the main story at all. Now, it's something you could easily view on YouTube in the worst case, but it is commonly complained about. The way I see it though, Falcom really wanted both of these games to be replayable to hold fans over while they waited for the next game. To speak personally, I don't mind these final bonding events existing as it does give extra content on repeat playthroughs, but I definitely see the problems people have with it. But this is going to have to be an issue we will have to revisit as we go into the next arc. But on that note, let's address what was my biggest fear coming into this game, the upgraded combo crafts and the completion process. If you recall, I had to replay Zero 5 times for every single achievement and every upgraded combo craft. So knowing there were going to be 7 party members in this game, I began to be kind of worried I would have to replay this game 7 times. The good news is, in some ways they made this a lot easier this time. Other ways not. Let's start with the part that really surprised me. Now once you have seen a final bonding event and save, it is then locked into your game data. When you load a New Game Plus file, those combo crafts are automatically loaded, meaning that you can get every upgraded combo craft in a single playthrough, thank God. That said, this doesn't mean you can do everything on your first time through, as there are still the ultimate weapons. Now luckily, unlike Zero, you can get 2 ultimate weapons and can always get at least 1 per playthrough. One for collecting every copy of this game's book Sunshine Ignis, as well as ore shards located on fields of battle during the final chapter. But that still leaves the other 6 characters, and if there are only 2 ultimate weapons per run, that means 4 playthroughs, right? Well, on New Game Plus, the game actually unlocks some new stuff. First are a few hidden scenes I won't share for spoiler reasons, as well as 6 optional super bosses, with 5 of them dropping Zamurian ore shards. This means that on all repeated playthroughs you are guaranteed an additional ultimate weapon, cutting the maximum playthroughs down to 3. Overall, this is an improvement, but it does have a couple problems. Azure is long, like a lot longer than Zero, and has a lot of missable stuff. For example, there's a master quartz where you have to feed your cat Kope every single in-game day, and I missed a day in both of my playthroughs, which felt incredibly demoralizing considering I thought I was pretty thorough, but I did manage to get it the 3rd time around, so there's that. It also might be because I played this during one of the more difficult college terms I've ever had, oh my god, but it felt like it was a lot harder to memorize the timing for missable events this time compared to Zero, so I had to redo Chapter 2 a lot more times than I would like to admit. Also, I bought a bootleg hard drive that kind of corrupted a whole bunch of my recording files, which meant that I had to re-record a good chunk of Chapter 2. I have fun making these videos sometimes. Add on to this, they decided to make the horror coaster one of the achievement records. Alright, I won't mince words on this one. This is the most miserable thing I've done in a Trails game since the fishing door in 3rd, and I nearly gave up on it just to get this video out there. In premise, this minigame is simple. You ride a cart, QTE show up, you press the button. The longer you go without missing, the higher the chain, and therefore the higher the points you obtain. To get the record, you need 4,000 points. And in order to do so, you need a massive chain. How do you do that? Never miss. The problem, it felt basically impossible. There were several moments where the QT was clearly on screen and I pressed the button, only for it to miss. I read online that changing the frame rate would help, so I did. Changing the frame rate to 30 did help a little, but no matter how much I played, I kept missing the buttons, and after sinking 4 hours into this, I opened up my Geofront copy and tried it there, and to my surprise, I completed the challenge in a couple tries at 60 FPS. What happened? Well, turns out the problem was actually because I remapped my controls. So to keep things simple, this minigame has 4 buttons: confirm, cancel, camp, and S-craft. I managed to change around the field buttons because I actually prefer the camp menu on triangle, but this essentially meant that I had 2 buttons assigned to triangle, so anytime triangle showed up I was basically pressing camp and S-craft at the same time, which was leading to it messing up. Now I realize this might be a little bit involved, but if I could talk to NIS for a moment about this, I would probably suggest that they make a separate button mapping scheme for the minigame specifically, but I don't know how involved that would be, and I wouldn't blame them if they did that. But for now, just remember to use default controls when doing this minigame, or suffer my curse. Despite that, I think this game has not been as bad to complete as I thought it would be going into it, but it's definitely not perfect. Just like 0, it requires more than 1 playthrough, and while this requires 1 less playthrough for everything than it did for 0, it definitely feels like the first playthrough has more than enough content for most people. I did really enjoy having optional super bosses on New Game Plus though, and to my surprise, the final boss was just as brutal on Nightmare despite me being a solid 15 levels higher than I was the first time, and as someone that loves a challenge, I really like that. Just like the last game, completing achievements gets you points to spend on New Game Plus features, free access to every minigame including Pain, an art gallery, cutscenes, and an S-craft gallery where you can view every single S-craft without the HUD, which was really nice for this video. So overall, despite how much work it was, I had a pretty good time completing this game by the end, and I think it balances out to being about as hard to complete as 0, which is something I really did not expect. But anyway, before we wrap this all up, we have one last topic to talk about. You know what it is already, it's the soundtrack. Continuing the trend of this game doing what Sky's second chapter did but for 0, a large chunk of 0's soundtrack returns from that game. However, the soundtrack is nearly doubled in Azure and matches the shift in tone really well. In fact, a few songs from Sky also make an appearance in this game to accompany the returning characters, with a really fun retro remix of a song from the Sky trilogy here. I won't spoil which song it is, but it caught me off guard and it's a lot of fun. As for the new songs though, like with the game before this, I also love basically the whole soundtrack. It's really good with a notable shift in tone compared to the game that came before, fitting the more serious nature of this story. There's even a song in here that basically took those Mega Man Star Force vibes I felt in the last game and cranked it up to 11, and I was in love with this track. I'm about to do something unconventional at the end of this section, so let's go ahead and get this out of the way. I really wanted to share some of my favorite battle themes in this game because they really took it to the next level in this title. Enjoy. Like with Zero, there is so much to enjoy here and way too little time, so I'll go ahead and put the following titles on screen. I love all of these songs, and Falcom's composers continue to bring the peak content here. While Zero perfected the atmosphere of Crossbell, Azure's music is also a masterclass in every sense of the word. I love basically every single song in this game, and that is never more true than the next song I'm about to talk about. I've been teasing this song all throughout this entire retrospective series so far, so I'm just going to go ahead and indulge myself. That's right, I'm about to talk about the final boss theme of this game. This is obviously going to be a massive song spoiler and is best experienced in-game, so if you do not want to be spoiled, go ahead and skip to the conclusion. This is your final warning. But without further ado, I present my favorite song of all time. This is the Azure Arbitrator. This song is metal as heck. I love the choir at the start that slowly transitions into that power metal goodness you hear throughout the rest of the song, with parts of the melody almost sounding like a conversation between the heroes and the final boss, but maybe I'm reading a bit too much into it, but I just love it. The way the song goes between highs and lows with energetic rock the entire way through is just incredible, and it can only be done by my man Takahiro Unasuga. This is the song that really made me fall in love with Unasuga's tracks, though it's worth mentioning that the final version was arranged by Yukihiro Jundo, who seems to be the classically trained musician of Falcom. Jundo also created a different boss theme in this game that actually has parts of Azure Arbitrator's melody in this, which is just some top level composition. I really love it. Also possibly sacrilegious, but I actually really like the Evolution version of this song. It uses real instruments, but does trade out a slow part for a guitar solo that I personally love to death, but I could see why some people prefer the balance of the original. I have listened to this song pretty much every single week for 2 years now, yet despite that, when I got to the final boss again, I still managed to just rock out to the melody. It's so fast-paced in all of the right ways, and I was very disappointed we didn't get another song like this in the Cold Steel games. An excellent theme in every sense of the word, and I don't think anything will ever top it. Trails to Azure, for me at least, has the perfect balance of everything. The plot is incredibly engaging, the characters get more development, the stakes are really high, the combat is refined to its absolute peak at this point, the bonding system is fun, the soundtrack is incredible, exploration is not tedious at all, it brings back older characters, sets up Cold Steel, and has moments that shock you. It is an insane ride. Now, of course, the game certainly has its issues, notably in the completion department, but replaying it has legitimately been one of the best gaming experiences of my entire life, and I cannot recommend it enough. I realize I'm not making some crazy controversial stance here. Trails to Azure is one of the most beloved games in the series, with its own fans having a cult status akin to Mother 3 or Final Fantasy 6. Still, it is genuinely how I feel, and if I had to give my reason why I prefer this to Second Chapter, it comes down to the scale of the story and the combat. Second Chapter is a game with a lot of heart, and it's the reason I became a fan, but this game's epic stakes and swerves make it a really fun ride that cemented Trails as my favorite RPG series of all time. And while I did enjoy the gameplay of Second Chapter, I think I've made it clear that the gameplay was on a gradual increase in quality ever since Second Chapter, with Azure's gameplay on a whole nother level. The ending of this game was also something I really did not expect, and it got me very excited to get into the Cold Steel games after this, but that is a story for another land. I think I have made it more than abundantly clear that I love the Crossbell arc. Trails from Zero manages to find a perfect balance between being plot-driven and world-driven, while improving the gameplay from Sky, and for good measure paying off a subplot from Sky in a way that was honestly perfect. Trails to Azure kicks things up to 11, while the gameplay creates the perfect middle ground of classic and modern Trails combat. Azure also pays off the plot threads from Zero, while giving characters from Sky some great moments too, and features a plot that has had long-lasting effects on the larger narrative all the way up through Cold Steel 4. But more than that, these games were a risk. They could have very easily just made Trails in the Sky 4 and had us follow Estelle and Joshua going on adventures in new lands, but this game changed the dynamic and let us follow a new cast of characters in a new setting and with a new tone and style. Trying to write a new plot that would continue the overall story while doing its own thing cannot be easy, and I really do think they stuck the landing. Heck, setting up the later arcs on top of all of that is also just such a power move, and I can definitely tell you playing Cold Steel without playing Azure would be a very different experience, as pretty much anyone who has done that will tell you that. The wildest thing though is that these games got officially released at all. As I mentioned way back at the start of this retrospective, there are many games that still, to this day, don't have translations, and some that do require you to go through a lot of hoops. Trails is a series with massive scripts, and even translating an older one would be an undertaking. You just cannot compare Trails to most other RPGs, which is part of why we're so behind the newer games in Japan. In many ways, I feel very blessed that I started the series as late as I did, because I got to play from first chapter through Cold Steel 4 in Japanese release order, and none of that would have been possible without the Geofront team and all the fans who pushed this arc all the way to the finish line. So once again, thank you Geofront, and thank you NIS for your work, though I do wish NIS was more transparent about the PS4 ports. That does not invalidate the work that was put in. Thank you guys so much. Now, despite all of my gushing, because I have been speaking from the heart this entire time, I do know this arc and this game in particular do have their detractors, and I honestly don't even expect this video to even change anyone's minds, because honestly, everyone plays these games for different reasons and kind of values different things about them. Really, I think it comes down to what you value the most out of Trails. As I said, Azure is my favorite RPG of all time, and if you have not played it yet, then it would mean the world to me if you played the Crossbell arc. Just also play the Sky games first, because there are some things that both of these games do that would really lose their punch if you don't have the context, but I think you get the idea by this point. I want to give a huge thank you to Snive, Notley, Kingdom Ace, Stupid Studios N, and Fielder Seth, and all of my KoFi supporters on screen for helping support this video in one way or another. This retrospective was easily the hardest thing I have ever had to make, so that support really means a lot. That said, now that the Crossbell arc is finished, it's time to move on to the next arc in the series. That's right everyone, next time class is in session, because we are going to be talking about the Trails of Cold Steel games, the most popular arc in the series, but also the most divisive. What do I think of the games? Well, you'll have to watch and find out. That said, I am probably going to be taking a break from reviewing the games for a little bit to work on other projects. If you would like to support me, there's my KoFi down below, and it would really mean a lot. I won't announce what I'll be making next, as it's not totally set in stone yet, but I'll be back to Cold Steel before too long. Regardless, I think it's finally time I put this thing up. Thank you guys so much for watching this Crossbell retrospective. It has sincerely meant a whole lot, and I hope to see you guys in class when we talk about Trails of Cold Steel. Have a great day, everyone.